Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's sermon prep. This coming weekend, we're going to be celebrating the 11th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Sounds a bit strange to say that. We haven't had Ordinary Time for a few weeks now, for a few months actually. And finally, it's as if after you've prepared for that big celebration and everything goes well and everyone has gone home, things start to turn down a notch. We're going back into the ordinary time. But the temptation is also to think that ordinary time just means normal. It means nothing. It means that there isn't anything new, anything special. That's true. But don't we live most of our time in ordinary time? Don't we live most of our lives in ordinary time? It's not always that we're expecting something great to happen. It's not always that there's something extravagant that is taking place in our lives. We find God in the simple, ordinary things of everyday life. That growth as we move strength to strength, as we move step by step towards the people that we want and we hope that we're going to become. So maybe it's because we are so used to ordinary time. Maybe it's because it's so long and we think it's just ordinary. It brings us nothing new. But God works in the ordinary things in our life. God shows his power in the simple and the ordinary everyday things. So then this weekend, our first reading is going to be taken from the book of Exodus chapter 19, verse 2 to verse 6a, while our responsorial psalm is going to be from Psalm 100, verses 1 to 2 and 3 to 5. While our second reading is going to be taken from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans chapter 5, verses 6 to 11. And then our gospel reading will be the gospel according to Matthew chapter 9, verses 36 to chapter 10, verse 8. In the first reading, we hear that in those days when the people of Israel came into the wilderness of Sinai, they encamped in the wilderness, and there the Israel encamped before the mountain. Moses then goes up to the mountain of God, and as the Lord had called him out of the mountain, and he says, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore you will obey my voice and keep my command. You shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." God takes Israel as his own possession. God chooses Israel to be, as he calls it in later on, his firstborn, the apple of his eye. The people who were slaves, a people who were not even considered to be anything by the normal people where they live, but somehow those are the people God chooses. In one of the prefaces, at least in the old translation of Mass, it used to say that God chooses weak men and he makes them strong. To this day, God continues to choose weak people and he makes them strong. He makes them his own possession. He moves us from just being normal peasants to being princes and princesses of this great kingdom where we are co-heirs with Christ. And then our responsorial psalm sort of affirms that we are his people, the sheep of his flock. Indeed, how good is the Lord. Eternal his merciful love. He is faithful from age to age. Our God who cares for us, who doesn't just choose us and leaves us, but a God who chooses us and takes care of us. Makes sure that you and I are taken care of. Our second reading is, as I said, from Romans chapter 5, verse 6 to 11. And St. Paul says to the Romans that if we are reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more shall we be saved by his life. As we become co-heirs, as we become God's special possession, his special people, we are then reconciled to him by the death of Jesus, as we know. And it's also in the life of Jesus that you and I receive new life. He says, while we were yet helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. One will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps a good man. One will even dare to die for a good man. But God shows us his love for us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. St. Paul is saying that no one can easily say that they'll shed their blood for someone else, they'll lose their lives for someone else. It says, well, unless there's a good man who's willing to stand up for another good man, perhaps he'd be willing to die. But Christ died for us while we were sinners, while we hadn't changed, while we were still dead to sin. Nevertheless, he saw a hope in us. There's something good that he saw in us, and that's why he died at that time. So that love of being God's special possession, to show that we didn't do a thing about it. He's the one who made the first move, who showed us his love, who brings us back to himself. That's the true gift of this God of ours. We don't have to do anything, but he loves us. Yet we are still in that dark, horrible, hurtful place, and he comes in and he pulls us through. When we go to then our gospel, Matthew chapter 9 verses 36 to chapter 10 verse 8. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless. They looked like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray therefore the Lord of the harvest to send out more laborers into his harvest. And he called to him his 12 disciples, and he gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every infirmity. And then after that we get the names of the 12 disciples. It's almost what we see in the first reading. God making the first step. God choosing his very own to help with his mission in the world. And those 12 men, yes, today they appear in the Litany of Saints. At that time they weren't saints. They were weak men like you and I. There were people who were looking for God's kingdom, though, who had their eyes on the ball, with had their hearts open to Christ. And that's why God was able to change them, to transform them, to give them this great gift of discipleship. And today, God can still call you and I in the same way. From wherever we are, he can still make something great of us. He can still make something beautiful of us, if only we're open to him. If only we also have our eyes on the ball and we have a heart that is open to Christ. That is that one we'll be looking at this coming weekend, the 11th Sunday in Ordinary Time. I hope to see you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.